First, we're going to turn our attention to arrow functions. And there are a couple of benefits of using arrow functions, the first of which is easy to understand by an example here. So I've got this nice 400, 500 page book here by an author that I really respect. Unfortunately, I've never got around to reading it because it's so long. And then I also have a 100-page book by the same author. Short and sweet, and I've read this one. I think actually I've read it a few times because it's easy to get through. Arrow functions are exactly like regular functions in JavaScript. They're just much more short and concise and to the point. In fact, they're so short and concise that maybe a better example is to think of an arrow function as like a cheat sheet. You can convey the same amount of information in a cheat sheet. It's just much more condensed than perhaps a 500-page book. And of course, when you're looking at a cheat sheet, you kind of have to look at it a little bit different than you look at a book. You have to really know what the compressed information represents. So the format of a cheat sheet is quite a bit different than a traditional book. And the same thing is true with arrow functions. The format's a little bit different, and it'll take you a little while to get used to. But once you get used to it, I think you'll really like taking advantage of the concise syntax that's available to you now.
I've got a mystery set up here for us to work on first. It's set up with a code pen, and the best way to get access to this is to come out to this gist that I have for the course. I'll be building this up as I go. You can see there are a couple of links already. Come out to this very first arrow functions mystery link and click on this. And by the way, I have the starting point as the primary link always, and then I have a completed point. Don't check the completed though unless you want to ruin the surprise. So click on the mystery. You'll be taken to CodePen, and this is likely the view that you'll see by default. It'll look a bit different than the style I have. I applied some themes and boosted fonts for recording purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and log in and get my styles. I've created a CodePen so that we could work through some basic examples of arrow functions. And I've got one typed out here. And specifically, this part is the arrow function. So I'm creating an arrow function, and I'm assigning it to this mystery variable. Take a moment, pause the recording if you need to, and take a guess what you think this arrow function does. And if you need a hint, stick around. Otherwise, go ahead and pause the recording and think about that. Okay, if you want a hint, here's some more code that takes that mystery variable, invokes it as a function, passing in the value 2, captures the result, and then logs that out. When I execute this code, what will be printed out to the console? So keep an eye on the console in the right-hand side of the screen here. I'm going to go ahead and run this code. And we get the value 4. Is that what you expected? Let's break this down. So our arrow function has an argument called x. Just like a regular function argument, this is passed in, and in this case, the value is squared. It's multiplied by itself. And in this arrow function in particular, there's an implicit return here, so the value of x squared is returned back as the result of this function call. Let's walk through this with our example of passing in the value 2 below. So in this case, when we pass in the value 2, x takes on the value of 2 then, and then we take x and we square it to get the value of 4, and then the implicit return means that that value of 4 is returned back, and in this case captured in our result variable, which then gets logged out. So as I mentioned, arrow functions are exactly like regular functions, they just have a different syntax, as you can see here. And this is one of the variants of what an arrow function can look like. Let's take a look at a few more. I want to give you a few additional challenges and see if you can work through these, and then we'll compare arrow functions to traditional functions side by side. So let's just continue on here with another challenge, and I'll call this Mystery 1. While I'm typing this out, start to think what it is you think that this arrow function will perform. And this time, let's go ahead and log out the result of calling Mystery 1 directly. And let's pass in 1 and 2. Okay, what is this going to log out to the console? Let's fire this off and see. So the value that gets logged out this time is the last value. Ignore the 4s. Those are from the previous function that we looked at. The value 3 comes out. Is that what you expected? So in this case, we're passing in 2 arguments to our arrow function, and that's why we now have 2 variables, also known as arguments with functions, on the left-hand side of the arrow. So do you see the arrow here? That's kind of like a fat arrow. On the left-hand side, we define our arguments just like a regular function. And then on the right-hand side is the body of the function. And in this case, it's a very short body. And all we're performing is x plus y. So we're adding together the 2 numbers that we pass in to get the value of 3. And again, we have an implicit return here, so we return back the value 3. This is a bit different than our initial arrow function. This one only had 1 argument, and so that's all you see to the left of the arrow is just 1 argument, as opposed to the 2 that we had down below. And thus one difference here, we don't need parentheses when there's only 1 argument, but we do need parentheses when there's multiple arguments involved. Otherwise, we're still performing a basic mathematic operation on the right-hand side, just a different one this time. Okay, let's do one more example. So let's make a mystery 2 here. And you tell me what you think this will do. So when I log out the result of calling mystery 2, what will we get in the console? Well, let me clear out the console here, and let's go ahead and fire this off. And we get out the value 6. Is that what you expected? So in this case, we have no arguments to this arrow function, as opposed to 2 before or 1 before that. So we just have empty parentheses, and that's the indication that there are no arguments to this arrow function. But we do, on the right-hand side, have a function body, and in this case, that implicit return kicks in, and we're just returning a constant value here. All right, so that's a couple of challenges. Next, let's turn to looking at a comparison of traditional functions side by side with arrow functions. Join me in the next video for that.